Murphy, we are at episode 3 of our 3-arc trilogy, The Siege. We have perhaps panned this episode a little bit in the first 2 episodes, but let's give it its due. Why is The Siege important, at least to this 3-arc trilogy?
Why is it you got to end somewhere? And it's an interesting little episode. It's shoot 'em up. And you're going to have a conclusion. You need to see what happens to Lee Nowis, and we need to see what happens to Bajoran. There are some logistical choices. It's definitely the weakest of the 3, but it serves as a good finale for their first 3-part. It's interesting to note that it ends with Lee saving Cisco, not to spoil the ending for anybody. It ends with Lee saving Cisco in the same way that Cisco saved Belial at the end of the first season, which is kind of interesting. I was like, that is a little, maybe look at them all as a 4-part of it. Who knows? Yeah, it's got some good performances. A little clunky, but what did you guys think of it?
Megan?
I liked it. Well, you mean, how I like things to be wrapped up neatly and given a nice conclusion. So I always appreciate that in an episode, even if it isn't the strongest. Lots of fun little notes in this one. Some great moments with Jake and Rom. Drake and Nog, really, that were quite cute. Rom had a good showing. I tend to appreciate when they give us a little humor with what's going on and almost the heist style aspects of the shoot 'em up where everyone's hiding it. There was some fun stuff in it. But yeah, it was a little less emotionally intense than the previous episodes, which is kind of a shame when you think about it, because you had Starfleet officers going rogue. So I feel like it really should have had a lot more weight and a lot more drama and a lot more consequence to it that it didn't feel like it necessarily had. But still, it was a solid ending. What do you think, Tom?
Point.
It was a solid ending, and you're absolutely right, Murphy. We had to wrap this up in some manner. I was interested in General Krim because he was clearly, to me, conflicted. He accepted the orders from the provisional government to do what he did, which was go to the space station and take it over. I think he found, obviously, his number 2 was not a trustworthy officer. We find out he was part of the rebellion. And I don't think Krim wanted to hurt the Federation staff who stayed behind along with Cisco, that he had his orders to carry out. And he realized when it all went south, it was the end of his military career. And so I felt a little sorrow because he had obviously done enough during the resistance to be appointed to that position after the provisional government took over. So I was interested in that. There was actually 2 other things that struck me. The first one was there's of course, a subplot with Quark engaging in fraud, selling seats that he doesn't own, and he ends up getting the short seat on musical chairs. And they finally find a place for him to evacuate a shuttle. And he is literally dragging his gold pressed latinum through the space station. And it's so heavy, he can't lift it. He has to drag it, and that's slowing him down. If what you love is gold, you may die with gold in your blood or in your veins. And I thought that was just really spoke to Quark and what he values. The other thing, though, was I didn't know there was a rule of acquisition that says, don't talk about my mama.
Oh, yeah.
Now, in the South, that's certainly a rule, but it's not a rule of acquisition. So I was surprised to find it. I think it was, 237 maybe? I may be off on
31.
that. 31. Do not talk about a Ferengi's mother. And we get to meet his mother later, and perhaps we understand why. But those two scenes, I thought I enjoyed that undertow and underplay. And I know we'll get to the end, but I thought Cisco, I don't know if counseling Kira is the right term, but what his remarks to her are really set the stage for a lot of the growth we see in her down the road. Anything about Jaro or Kai Wynn that's really different or new that we learned beyond from episode 2, The Circle?
Yeah, I'd love to talk about Vedic Wynn a little bit, because her whole relationship with Jaro and with everyone else is so interesting throughout. She tries to establish power wherever she goes. Like when Kira was at the monastery, when she was stepping in a previous episode, interfering with the classes at the school on DS9. And then the moment this partner that she has just made extravagant promises with, they're going to work together, they're going to lead Bajor, they're going to be the best team that Bajor has ever seen. And as soon as the slightest bit of suspicion falls on Jaro, she's just, I'm not with him, never been. We've got to investigate you thoroughly. Like that ruthlessness. She would be one-dimensional if she wasn't so obviously sincere in her belief that she was right. So I just, a fantastic antagonist. So interesting and just so hateable. Oh my gosh, she's so hateable, but in a really pleasing way.
Alwyn is so central to what DS9 is as a story. She is legit a main character. Like, I know she shows up sporadically, but she's a main cast. She is there pretty much from the end of the first season right to the end. And her entire arc is fantastic. But yeah, it's just sinister. It's that quiet kind of passive sinister. She's not outright vicious, but she's very, very determined, unwavering, unflinching kind of hardness. And she just gets better the more screen time she has. Something about Louise Fletcher's eyes that are just like, she can give you this dead stare. She did it in Cuckoo's Nest. She does it really good here. Yeah, really interesting.
What about and I just lost my note. Where did that go?
I had one thing I'd love to get both of your impressions on. And this was something that I think the episode did not really do justice to in terms of what happened, but what it must have meant to Kira to be flying that ship and shooting at her former colleagues. She is now, she's, as Murphy, you mentioned, dedicated her entire life to freeing her people, the Bajoran people, and now she's shooting at them. And she even said the guys flying those planes used to be the ones flying these. And they showed a little kind of the emotional impact it had on her in the end, but I don't think they nearly touched on it enough, what that must have meant her to do. And it was similar with the Starfleet. They were going against this organization that they've been with, and I feel like the impacts, maybe they're happening under the surface, but I feel like they were so much bigger than what was shown in the episode. What do either of you think?
I think that's a great point, and we saw that even more so for Starfleet when the Maquis comes on the scene, but absolutely right about what Kira was feeling. And she's the man now. She's part of the man, as we would say. And I think she really had a lot of cognitive dissonance there. And once again, I saw some fabulous acting with her eyes and her frown, and her facial expressions that I thought conveyed exactly what you just said, Megan.
Yeah. I would raise an interesting point that you guys were talking about before, and that is the consequences for Starfleet going rogue in this case on the state. There are no consequences because Starfleet, clearly, if they're willing to abandon the station this quick, and they're willing to abandon the wormhole, and the placement of importance that Starfleet places on DS9 and Bajor, it is, again, it's a backwater post. They don't see it as, it's not on the neutral zone, it's not border the Klingons, it's close to the Cardassians, but it's staffed with low-level people, and they're not paying attention when Sisko goes rogue. They tell him to leave. Nobody's there to make sure he does it. Nobody cares. It's not a consideration for them. And this will show up again and again. It's in the middle of season 2, when the Maquis start to come in, when more important Federation interests are threatened, then it starts to take a little more precedence. But right now, nobody in Starfleet Command, outside of maybe a few captains and admirals and some ambassadors, really gives a toss about DS9. They're not watching what he's doing. So, I think that's one of the reasons he's able to sort of skirt this. They're like, oh, you stayed behind? Okay, whatever. Yeah.
I remembered what I wanted to raise, which is the death of Lenalis. Fortunately, was that preordained in the first episode of this 3-episode series, or could his character have gone in a different direction, or literally did he have to die?
I think he has to. It's Sisko jumping through the air at the end of the first season to save Bareil from being killed by a Bajoran, and then a Bajoran jumping through the air to save Sisko from being killed by a human willing to sacrifice himself for a Bajoran to save another, and then the same thing happens in the end of this episode, except it's a Bajoran sacrificing himself for a human case of Bajoran. It's an interesting sort of loop that closes nicely.
You seem to be he seemed to be fairly happy with the end. He said, "I'm off the hook." And it kind of gave me the impression that he felt that who he was as a real person had died a long time ago. And kind of now his body and his reputation are just catching up with the rest of him. So I think, it would have been a hard character to keep around because he was that important. All of these massive things happened because of him. What do you do with a character after? If they're not going to become a major player, death is one elegant way to write them off. And I think it was emotionally and logically consistent with what he wanted. He got to, in the end, die the hero everybody thought he was, but he didn't have to continue to live a life that he thought was a lie. So probably the best possible outcome. What did you think, Tom?
I think that's probably true. The legend had to die, and he was very content with that. He didn't want to live that legend, but it probably gives Bajor and Bajorans more of the legend rather than to find out he's a fallible human like the rest of us. I wanted to maybe run to the end where when O'Brien, Sisko, and Kira are sitting in Quark thinking about the events, Kira is really devastated because she believed that Tanalis would return to make things better on Bajor. And Sisko reminds her that she's a hero and she can't bring herself to appreciate that compliment and leaves the bar. And I really want to tie it into Murphy's remarks. I think it was in the circle and maybe even earlier from you, Megan. We saw a lot of growth in Kira. And Murphy, when you said she never had a childhood, she didn't have parents very much. It gets worse for her on that score as we go deeper into the series. She has been an armed rebel probably since she was a teenager. And now she's in a position of authority. She literally gets up and leaves when Sisko says this to her. I thought in the scene, it wasn't because she was rejecting it. I thought it was because simply she could not conceive of herself as that way. And then when you talked earlier in the circle about she's basically always been on her own, and she's now just getting used to being a part of a team or a part of something greater than herself, she's still not ready to admit that to herself. Any thoughts on that one way or the other?
Yeah, I think, like I said, I mean, this is here evolving when we first see her and she's arguing with someone on a screen in that very first episode. And then we see her sort of moving towards something greater than herself. It comes up, she's faced with these dilemmas throughout the series of dealing with elements of her past and dealing with ways of achieving a sort of level of personal growth. She's probably unrecognizable by the end of the series. Becomes so soft-spoken. It's a really neat transition throughout the 7 seasons. But you can just see more like when we get towards the middle and the end. You'll see what I mean. It's really interesting.
It's a bit of an unkind thing that Sisko said to her. Because it's just in context. Obviously, he meant well. There's everyone, heroes all over Bajoran. But to say it to Kira right then, she had just been tortured by Bajorans, her own people, who she had worked so hard to save. She shot at Bajorans, who she had spent her whole life trying to save. The hero who was supposed to fix everything, who could have united everyone, who could have made things just a little bit easier, was just killed. And he's, oh no, you who is just are now questioning everything that you thought you knew about your people. You're one of the heroes. She's probably wondering, are there Bajoran heroes other than Nallis? Was he the last one? Did the last one just die? So I thought it was ill-timed, if well-intentioned.
Yeah, it's an interesting point.
So we've got a bit of time left. Maybe we could just sort of wrap up our thoughts of the 3-episode arc. Murphy, you were insistent that we do this, and you were spot on with your insistence. What was it about these 3 shows, and either singularly or with the arc together, that you found so powerful?
Yeah. I was watching these, and I've watched these 3 episodes many times, but over the last couple of weeks, I've been watching them again to get notes and then I went back and watched Hands of the Prophets and realized it's a 3-parter. It's a continuation of last season, but like I said, it closes a certain arc from the beginning. The loop that's closed, now we can go and do other things. We're going to go and we're going to set up the Badlands and the Maquis hanging out in the Badlands, and they're going to become, and then we're going to see stuff down the line. But this sort of ends that will they, won't they Bajor question, that starts in the beginning. It's incredibly pivotal to the series as a whole. We don't get another three-parter until way later in the series. I don't even know if we get a ton of two-parters that are really cohesive. Maybe Way of the Warrior later on in season 4. Yeah, I think it's great. I think if you're going to watch DS9, this is a necessary episode to watch. I think this is sort of binds a bunch of stuff together, forward and past. Yeah. I also like the idea. This is just something I wanted to add, really, as an aside. There's the moment I think it's in The Circle, where Kira talks about how terrible her finger painting was when she was a kid and how her parents were so embarrassed. And then later on in the series, he's doing something artistic again. Kira's lack of artistic ability is a weird plot point that resurfaces over and over. I'm not sure why, but they make subtle references to it the whole series through. And I've always been curious as to why. Doesn't mean anything. I just found it odd. Just one of those odd things about the series that I like. Anyway, yeah. What do you guys think?
It's like the world without shrimp in the Buffyverse. Every now and then, every couple of seasons, they'll mention the world without shrimp.
Yes. Yeah.
Megan?
Yes, I like this triad of episodes for the big ideas that they introduced. Setting up Kai Wynn, Sylvetic Wynn at this point for the role that she's going to be playing. The kind of demonstration that Cardassia is defeated, but still active, still moving. That's going to become more and more, but they really are inserting them back in the plot in a little bit. And I think also getting into the conflicts that the crew of the DS9 are going to end up having with Starfleet and the Federation. So I thought it really excellent 3-parter episode. I enjoyed it. I like the character stuff, especially Nog and Jake. Gosh, they had a cute little moment. And we're not going to let any stupid French stuff stand in our way, is a cry often heard across the land up north. It was a nice little moment.
I liked this for the reasons you guys said, but also what I felt was typically a series made a turn or a veer or a different direction. And I felt like these 3 episodes exploded from where we were at the end of season 1 to where we could go down the road. And I'm going to once again just shout out for episode 1 I thought that's one of the top maybe 5, if not Star Trek episodes, certainly DS9 episodes. And even if The Circle and the Siege didn't hold up to that first episode's greatness, putting the 3 together gave us the possibility of a different arc. This was no longer the Federation in space. This is something very different. There's lots of competing ideologies. There's lots of competing business interests. There are certainly military interests in play. There's strategic interests. There's a misuse of the prime directive, as we now know. But I felt like it exploded whatever was left of DS9 being a Star Trek show about Star Trek, the Federation, to something very different in science fiction. And it goes in lots of different ways. So for that, I just think it was incredibly powerful 3-show arc. The emotions and the hints I saw, the PTSD, even in Lenalis and even Kira, I think came to the fore in this. Finally, Dr. Bashir began to grow up a little bit. Even he was there. But, every step counts. He's not the sniveling little rat he was in the first season. Odo maintains a very strong presence. We saw a part of Quark who could be helpful and useful when either he chose to or was economically incentivized to do so, in spite of the fact that he loves gold more than anything else. Yeah, Jake and Nog. Jake explaining to his dad, you're just not ready for this conversation. And the racism I talked about in the first episode. But it just, to me, really said, wherever we're going with this, guys, it's going to be different. So buckle up. It's going to be a bumpy ride, but it's going to be a fun ride. So that's really what I thought about the 3-show arc.
Yeah, you made a good point about Quark. And he later, interesting to note that Quark's relentless and oftentimes ill-fated quest for financial reward has as we'll see, devastating impacts on the Federation and on the Alpha Quadrant later on, which is really interesting from this one little dude at a bar to anyway. But yeah, you'll look at it later for sure.
Guys, this has just been a ton of fun. I have learned so much from both of you all, and I've learned a lot because you had us watch these 3 episodes, Murphy. So shout out. Thank you.
I'm glad you guys liked them. Yeah.